Tiago, welcome. If you could just begin by introducing yourself and some of the work that you do.
Of course, Sam. It's great to be here. My name is Tiago Forte. I have a company called Forte Labs, which is really just a corporate facade to do whatever I feel like doing.
That's kind.
It's an education company. We do everything from live workshops in person to online courses. We have ebooks, we have blog posts, we have just a whole range of educational materials, all focused on training people to be radically more effective in the modern world using technology. So that's kind of the common theme. And we take an incredibly broad view of productivity, not just, checking boxes and processing your email, but really the full span of what it means to be a generative and effective human being today. Which again, just basically allows me to get into anything I want under the banner of this is tax deductible.
Yeah, that's great. That's great. And I mean, this space is changing so rapidly. It's kind of an explorer as well as it's not just like, apps and productivity and, sitting down and getting things done, but it's also like what is on what's now available on the menu of technology and how are things changing. And it's a space that's evolving so rapidly. I feel like you're a bit of an explorer in that regard.
Yeah, I'm really a researcher. I just can't stand academia. Never did well in school, all throughout school. So I kind of had to invent my own little research lab, really, which is researching and often experimenting, trying out everything from apps and gadgets to new ways of thinking to new breathwork exercises, really all sorts of things. And then I spin off content and educational programs as a way to pay the bills.
So talk to me, how did you come to do this? What's the story behind, I mean, you don't have to go into the deep life story, but what brought you to doing this full time?
I wish I could say it was a very meticulously designed master plan, but really, I had a consulting job in San Francisco. I worked for this small French boutique consulting agency.
From the US?
Did you say, am I from the US or are they from the US?
Are you from the US?
Yes, I'm from Orange County, which is in Southern California, just south of Los Angeles.
Yeah.
But then during college and then after college, I was abroad for several years, came home to Orange County, decided I didn't want to be in Southern California. And then I started applying to jobs in Silicon Valley. All I knew was I wanted to be in Silicon Valley. That's where everything was happening. That's where all my idols were. And that was the basis of my applications. Ended up at this consulting firm. I was there for just like 18 months. And when I left there, I really just had no savings, no plan, nothing. I just tried to do whatever I could, just a series of projects and selling random things online to try to just stay independent. That was really the most important thing.
What sort of stuff were you selling early on?
Well, I say random stuff, but really the first thing I did was an online course. It was basically a translation of the best-selling productivity book, Getting Things Done, GTD.
Yeah.
Which even more at that time was really taking off. And really, I was so naive. I didn't know you're not supposed to just get someone's material from a book and make it into a course. But I did, and that course was super successful. It really kind of gave me my first runway, gave me my first big break, and set the stage for my entire business of creating educational content.
So how did you get into productivity in general? And is productivity the space? Would you call it the productivity space? So it's a weird one.
Problematic. It's problematic, and people constantly tell me, especially after getting into my work and reading my stuff, they're like, productivity doesn't describe what you do at all. I just haven't found a better word. I don't like philosophy. I don't even like effectiveness, which I feel like is too vague. I'm really interested in the very practical mechanics of how things are accomplished, not the big theory, but like the really tiny details. And that's why I've continued to use personal productivity.
Okay. So one of your, I guess, major projects, or if people were to go online and type in your name or Forte Labs, they'd come across your course, Building a Second Brain. So can you talk to me a little bit about that?
Sure. Happy to. Yeah. That's really my front and center, my focus. It is an online course, a month-long online course, soon to be a book. I'm working on the book version now. And it's the end result of 5 or so years. When it first came out, I had been self-employed for 5 years of just teaching, training, consulting, coaching, all these things in the world of productivity. And it's my idea of what is most needed in the world today to make people more effective, which is a second brain. It's kind of like the idea is that an average human life is now too complex to be managed by an average human brain.
Yeah, and I think everyone listening to this could probably agree with that. I mean, I think it's kind of nice knowing that everyone has forgotten to respond to at least someone on their contact list. Like I've got friends and family or whatever that I've left them on scene. I've for whatever reason, I haven't actually responded to that message, or I haven't followed through with that promise that I made ages ago for whatever reason. And it's purely because the world's too goddamn complex, and I'm just this finite meat sack just trying to make it in this crazy world. So that really resonates with me. So when you say second brain, what does that mean in this let's say digital context?
So it's funny, just before our call, I spent an hour trying to come up with a tweet-sized answer to that question. What is a second brain? It's still more than twice as long as a tweet is allowed to be. So I still have some work to do.
Just going to split it down into two. You want to stay within that character limit. It's the
no, I gotta get it down. It's part of my book proposal, but I'll read you just the first sentence of what I have here, which is, a second brain is a trusted digital archive for all your most valuable knowledge and ideas. So it needs to be digital, I think. It's important that what you have stored there is instantly accessible on your phone, on your computer, now on your smartwatch, that you can search it, you can tag it, you can organize it, you can share it with others.
That's why it needs to be digital, right? Because the utility of just, even though we might like I get, it's better when I'm writing stuff. I just feel more connected to what I'm doing. But in terms like the utility that digital tech provides just trumps everything. I hate using that word now, but just trumps everything. And yeah, okay. So it needs to be digital. Sorry for cutting you off. Continue.
No, it really does. And there's a raging debate in the, this is funny, in the note-taking world, because I would love to say paper is just as good. I mean, paper is beautiful. It's classic. It's wonderful. But when I sit down to work with someone in a coaching relationship, and they have, this has happened many times, a bookcase full of moleskins. And they go, oh yeah, there's all my ideas and my quotes and my knowledge and my learnings. And I just go, do you have access to that really? Is it any better to have it there on your shelf than, in a dusty basement or a bank vault somewhere? It's really not accessible when it's in that form.
And cataloging that and trying to you need a personal librarian to get access to your own knowledge bank.
Yeah. So I mean, and I think this is something that people understand. Like the average person uses notes, digital notes, even, if you look on your iPhone, the Apple Notes, I'm sure Android has something similar, like the default note-taking app. People have grocery lists, recipes, reminders, people's names, meeting notes. It's all these things very naturally get recorded. The thing that is missing is the other adjective there, which is trusted. Right? That is a whole different ballgame, is actually trusting that thing to save everything you put into it in a format that is relevant and usable, and most difficult of all, accessible when you actually need it.
Yeah. So we all have this second brain already, let's say, but it's just really, really bad. It doesn't function the way, the information may be there, but it might not be accessible. It may not be in a format that's widely usable. I can't take my Google Keep Notes, let's say, and then chuck them into some other platform easily and search between them all. It's all these different platforms are kind of not quite knitted together in a way that would be like a brain might function like. So how could we construct, like, what are some ideas or thoughts or principles that we could use that you advise we use to construct these second brains so that they're actually as useful and so they don't get in the way? Because that's another thing. Sometimes these things just get way too complex. We spend more time organizing things than actually doing the work, and that's not ideal.
Exactly. Yeah, I mean, the first one would be that it has to be centralized. It has to be centralized and integrated. If you think of your biological brain, if I tell you, okay, think of the last time you saw an elephant. Okay, that brings to mind something. And then I say, okay, now think of your earliest memory of your mother. Or I say, think of an interesting philosophical argument that you heard recently. Like, I can say anything and something or other will come to mind. And you don't have to offload a memory module and then walk down a hall and onload another memory module. The fundamental fact of your biological brain is that it's one. It's a one integrated thing. And that needs to be true of your second brain too. And this is, a hard thing for people we live in a decentralized world where we like to think of like, oh, the internet and all these decentralized networks, and I use all these different apps. That's wonderful. But for your most like interesting, valuable knowledge and insights and ideas, they need to be in one central place. And the place that I recommend is a digital note-taking app.
Yep. Which sort of apps? I mean, there's obviously plenty of them. Like one that springs to mind immediately. Google Drive, Dropbox, OneDrive, Notion, and other like more niche things. Like those are more, I guess, more broad. But then, and this is, I guess, one of the problems. The more niche you get, the less integrated it can become. So, which ones have you found that work well for people, or are which apps fit best into this schema, I guess? And what would the ultimate app perhaps look like? Actually, we don't answer that question, because don't answer that. That's too much. We could be here all day. We will be here all day.
Yeah. It's funny because this world of digital notes is so tool centric. People spend a lot of time and energy talking about this app for that versus that app, comparing features, comparing functionality, talking down one, talking up the other, all these things. Maybe it's because I'm coming more from the content side, the educational side. I'm very tool agnostic. I personally use Evernote, but not because I did any rigorous across the board analysis. It was really just the first one that I started using and liked. And people in the course, we have in the online discussion forum, we have threads for more than 24 different apps.
Oh, wow.
There's more than 24 different notes apps that people have used to take my same course, which kind of shows you that the best note-taking methodologies are tool agnostic.
Yeah. Well, that's great. That's really good, especially for you. I've just started using Notion. I haven't been excited about a note-taking app or anything like that in a while, but I'm really starting to enjoy Notion. Anyway, so what is? I saw this term pop up in one of your posts, and I identify with it strongly. What's strategic laziness?
Yeah, so strategic laziness is the idea that your laziness is actually one of the best sources of innovation. That, what is innovation? Innovation is doing more with less. It's leverage, right? It's some kind of shortcut or better design or better formulation of something that allows you to get where you're going more efficiently and with less effort. And if you think of laziness, there's all sorts of kind of workplace or like home hacks, like things you can sort of repurpose or use in a different way to kind of fix things in your home. And to me, that's one of the best examples of innovation. And so what I actually advocate in my teaching and stuff is like, don't treat laziness as evidence of moral defect, as evidence, in this productivity world. So often we can ascribe our so-called failings or our weaknesses or our mistakes and make it mean something about us. I'm lazy. I'm don't have self-discipline. I'm procrastinating. There's something wrong with me. And I think there's a really interesting kind of mindset shift where you can start to just reframe many of those things and embrace them. And things that were before weaknesses actually become strengths.
Okay. So what sort of weaknesses could become strengths in this, in this thread?
Yeah. So I'll give you a couple examples. One simple one is really informal organizing. When I talk to people about organizing, they often have this kind of preconception of organizing that it's an aesthetic thing, right? Like, what does it mean to be organized? They imagine nice little neat rows of pencils and little file folders that are evenly spaced, or books on the shelf sorted alphabetically or by color, right? As if it's like an art project. And I really had a different perspective on this growing up with my dad, who is one of the most organized people I know, but also the messiest. He's an artist. He's a painter. And you go into his room and there's just like paint covering every surface. There's random stuff in piles. He used to go like dumpster diving, find stuff in the neighbor's trash that he would want to paint because it was interesting, like really messy and really organized. And what I got from that was a philosophy of organizing, that what it means to be organized is that you have things arranged in such a way that they support effective action, right? If you are able to take action effectively, then, and your environment supports that, your tools support that, you are organized, even if aesthetically it looks like a big mess.
So how would that translate in some of these digital apps?
So how it translates is I really encourage people to do what really comes most naturally, which is informal organizing. Don't worry about the titles of notes. Just write the first thing that comes to mind. Don't worry about spelling. Don't worry about punctuation, capitalization. Don't use this fancy taxonomy. Even within notes, like if you think of like a formal document, it needs, very precise headings and very consistent formatting, and there can be no errors. The punctuation has to be perfect. With notes, you don't need any of that formality. Right? With notes, no one is going to see it unless you specifically share it. So I say your notes should be messy. They should be informal. There should be things just thrown in there randomly. There should be mistakes, because that is your own personal creative process.
Okay. So I know you've got this acronym that might sum up a lot of this. Is it PARA? P-A-R-A?
Yes. Yeah. I say para as in parachute.
Para. Yeah, gotcha. So can you talk me through that and how that might fit into this, how that fits in here?
Yeah, let's see. So para is really just my digital organizational system. There's a free article on my blog that we could link to that kind of explains how it works. And it essentially says, instead of creating this infinite hierarchy of categories, right, which is like the classic, you create 50 different folders and you're like, oh, now I'm going to be perfectly organized. And then a few days later, like, I can't even remember what folders exist.
Well, it's also paralyzing. Like I found that when I tried to organize my information, there's an infinite number of ways I could do it, it seems. And I sometimes get overwhelmed with the fact that I could do, like, this could be nested here and this actually connects to this and this and this. And I just like, you know what? I'm not going to do this. And then I move on to doing something else because I just get overwhelmed by the enormity of just trying to reduce this incredibly complex network of information to something that's navigable, however you say
it. Yeah. And what my intention with para was really, like, I would see this in my teaching and in my coaching. People use the excuse of, I need to get organized, as this eternal, endless, carte blanche, like catch-all excuse to just never do what they really say they want to do, right? It's like the state of being disorganized just becomes this eternal, never-ending thing. And with para, I just really want to show people that it's solvable. It is a completely solvable problem to organize your entire digital life in a very short amount of time. And the way to do it is to not organize by categories or topics, right? Like psychology, habits, productivity, philosophy, but by projects. Your organizing principle of your digital life, the very best one, and trust me, I've tried them all, is your projects. So basically the set of very active goals that you're working toward right now. And the cool thing about that, there's two huge things that make that easy. One is it's things you're working on, so you're not going to forget about them, right? And two, there's a finite number of projects that you can be working on at any given time. So it's sort of like your limited capacity as a human, which you normally see as a limitation, becomes your greatest constraint, becomes wonderful because it limits the number of places to keep things.
That's awesome. That's awesome. So would you say that's where people generally go wrong with productivity writ large? They just kind of get overwhelmed with the enormity or the potential that there is in front of them, all the variety of different tools and tasks and all these things, and they just get overwhelmed, and then they just think they just kind of postpone it, or they don't do it properly. Like, where do people generally go wrong?
Oh boy, how much time do we have? It's a lot of things, man. I mean, in that example, just in organizing your files, there's a ton of pitfalls. Creating too many categories, extending it, infinitely horizontally all the way to the horizon is a common pitfall. It sounds like a good idea. Oh, I want to have specific little dividers for all my things. And yet it becomes unmanageable. But also vertically, right? Infinite nesting is another big pitfall, right? Folder, subfolder, 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 until it's so specific that there's like one thing that can go in that subfolder 6 layers down, and nothing else. And then you never find that file again because you never have a reason to get that specific.
Yeah. Okay. It kind of reminds me of when I was preparing for this talk. I studied philosophy, and last year I wrote a paper on why mobile phone ownership and access to the internet is drastically more important for the delivery of delivery of human rights, but also ensuring what you could consider a base level of human dignity. And a part of one of the articles I came across, or one of the papers I came across, described these digital devices as potential extensions of the brain, as we're talking about, extensions of the mind, actually. And the ethical considerations that come with that are, numerous, like if Google holds our information, and that is could be technically thought of as an extension of our minds, then should we have complete control over that data, and yada yada yada. We can talk about that for a long time. But I remember trying to find the source just to bring it up in this conversation. I went into my Google Drive, and then I went into university, and then I went into the it was postgrad, and then the semester, and then the blah 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 blah. And I went through like 7 folders to finally get to this thing, and I nearly didn't find it. So it's very, very close to home. Very, very close to home.
Yeah, it's oh my gosh, it's such a deep topic. Yeah, I feel like it's not at all a stretch to say that yourself, whatever that is now clearly distributed. It's distributed among your tools and your storage locations and your devices, and also in your social networks and all these things. And what does it mean when that distributed self is not under control? It's not organized. It's not accessible. It's not something you trust. Now, there's an interesting question. What if we all have this distributed extended self and we don't trust that self? I mean, that gets to the heart of self-confidence and self-efficacy and agency and all these things.
Yeah. I'm just thinking it's like a fractured self in a way.
Yes.
It's a little fractured self that doesn't map onto, or it doesn't map onto what you're really like. But what you're talking about made me think of this. It made me think that and I've noticed this in my own thinking, because we have Google, we can just Google things. We no longer need to store information. What I generally do is I look at something like some determination. It could be an article that I've read online that says this is some statement of fact. And then I don't remember let's say the science behind it, but I remember the determination, and I remember where to find it. So it's like I store lots of metadata, and I have like this big, huge repository of metadata. And then if I need to go and find something out, I know where to look. So I can. Yep. So it's like it seems like a very, and I think we all do this intuitively now, or it just might be how we've always done it. But now that we have access to an unlimited amount of information, we just have all these meta tags that we just go and explore whenever we need to, and then update our information accordingly. So I might remember something, I think that statistic was 75% this, but I go and look at it, but it's actually 80%. That's good enough for navigating the world. All we need is like a certain level of approximation to navigate effectively. Like like Pareto principle, we only need like that solid 80% that comes from, the 20%. So,
I think that's a good thing. I think this trend is so positive for humanity. If you look at in the past, what a staggering percentage of so-called education was just memorization. It was just get these really dry, precise facts, which is just about the thing the human brain is the worst at remembering. There's a lot of things that the human brain can remember incredibly well. Faces, experiences, things like that. Facts are the worst. And that's why that's the first thing that we should outsource, to Google, to note-taking apps. And people still fight this. It's very funny to me that people fight this idea. There's still this sense of security, this sense of like certainty of just having it all yourself. It's sort of like a false sense of self-sufficiency, I think. It's the informational equivalent of storing your life savings under your mattress, right? Yeah. Oh, I have it all right here. It's safe. It's right here under my bed. But that's false when someone can come in and just take it. It actually is actually more secure to distribute your money in places you don't even know where it is in this modern world that has so much uncertainty.
Yeah, uncertainty is the biggest source of anxiety, I think, for in general. And I came across this article, I think it was last year, but came back to I looked at it again last week. It's about this guy called Carl Friston, I think. He's this prolific neuroscientist. And I can't remember if he's applying this idea of what I think is called the free energy principle. And it's basically this thing that's been found. It's like kind of this universal law of sorts, or there's this observation that all sorts of systems, and please, those listening to this, I may butcher this. You go find this out yourself if you're very interested. But I think many, many systems, including life, what they try to do is minimize surprise. So to try and ensure that, and what he has observed, or what others have observed, is that nearly all systems have an internal model of the external world, from bacteria to us. And people building artificial intelligence have actually taken this principle, and rather than, I think the comparison was a reinforcement learning algorithm. We want this algorithm to play a game and optimize for X, optimization algorithms, things. Yeah. So when an algorithm that was an optimization, when this algorithm was just trying to optimize, when that was compared to an algorithm that all it was trying to do was minimize surprise, the one that minimized surprise trumped all. Which I think's really quite interesting, and it maps well onto my experience. Uncertainty is the mind killer. It's where all my anxiety comes from. And when facts can change, well, when they do change every single day, and when we're now living in this, I think of it as like the Wild West now. We're so immersed in the change that we don't see it as much, but shit is going crazy. And I think everyone's operating up with this quite a high level of uncertainty, and we're all just pretending things are okay. But in actual fact, that's just not. We're all silently panicking. Maybe not silently in some cases. But yeah, I'll send you a link if you're interested. It's really quite fascinating, this free energy principle. I'm sorry for going off on that little tangent, but I just thought it was so cool. I'm really interested in how. So, given that there's so much to know, it's just ridiculous, how much there is to learn out there. One way of becoming more efficient at navigating this incredibly complex world is understanding and learning about the key principles that tie everything together. So maths is useful, statistics is obviously useful, but complexity science, so just understanding how things scale how things scale, and all these little laws that can be applied, that are applicable to systems everywhere. You suddenly, if you understand these things, you can become like the ultimate generalist in a way. You're adaptable to any situation. And I think what you're doing actually fits directly into that, because what we do is navigate the world based on, and the way we navigate is using the information we have at our disposal. And in order to navigate most effectively, we need to be able to access that information, because we now can extend our brain, as you call it, by terabytes and terabytes and terabytes. But if it's all bullshit, well, then it's useless, right? If I can't actually access it, it's useless.
Yeah, I think there's an analogy I use in my course that seems to be very helpful, which is information is like food. And in the past, that maybe was more abstract. But I think one thing we're learning in this modern, very information-centric world is that it's more like food than we thought, in that it's fundamental to survival. You think information, that's kind of abstract. That's for people who are quite high on Maslow's hierarchy. They have most of their basic needs fulfilled. It's for people who work in very particular professions, journalists and scientists and engineers. But our world has become so digital that now information is quite low on the hierarchy of needs. You really need information to make basic sense of the world at a day-to-day level. It's no longer this very abstract ivory tower thing.
Yeah. I think it's even more fundamental than that. In that everything is information, like everything that we see and touch is an instantiation of order. And we brought into the world as our genes code for how we are. We come into the world with not pre-programmed, but with an ability to navigate the world to a certain degree. And we, through the exposure to the environment, we learn stuff, and we also discard what we learn as well. It's like this constant process of learning and unlearning and relearning. And what I think is, I don't know, on Twitter, there's been this huge discussion about IQ, IQ literature and all of that. That's been going on for a couple of years, because, we don't need to get into that. But what I think, when I think about intelligence, something that I think strikes me, I see IQ in a way as just raw processing power, right? But it doesn't matter, that's just your ability to process information, maybe recognize patterns, but it doesn't really, if you've got shitty information, if your information is useless, if it doesn't map well onto the environment, you're useless. It doesn't matter if you can, if you're operating at 100,000 revs or whatever. If you're putting crap in, you're going to get crap out. So I think what real intelligence is, or something like it, is the ability to discern what is useful and good information and update your model accordingly. And it's the people who do that at all times. It's people who do that every single day that I think really, really make it. And it's hard, because what you're dealing with is constant uncertainty, because when you operate like this, you realize that you'll never really get it. And it's just a constant process of getting it and becoming slightly more attuned to the world around you. Which is why, and maybe we'll get into this, I think psychedelics are pretty, can become quite a wonderful tool.
Yeah. I was just talking to a fairly well-known YouTuber this morning, and we were talking about this. I'm doing a lot of video editing now. I decided beginning of this year, I really needed to branch out into new kinds of media, and I wanted to do video. So I usually when I want to learn a new skill, I have to take on a project along the lines of what I was saying earlier. Without a project, it's not real. And so I decided to to do an amateur documentary on my dad and his work. Like I said, he's an artist, he's a painter. He just had in April a 30-year retrospective on his work, and I thought, oh, this would be a great chance to do a little, mini documentary. And so for about 6 hours a day for the past 3 days, video editing is ridiculously time consuming. It's the most time consuming thing I've ever done. But a couple of things I noticed. First was my ability to shape reality is unreal. Like I'm in Adobe Premiere, and I'm like, based on if I cut right here or right here, it completely changes the meaning of what the person is saying. Because they might say something and at the end they go, oh, just kidding. Or they might laugh in a way that tells you that they was bullshit, what they were just saying. If you cut that off, then they seem completely serious. I'm like, this is crazy.
Yeah.
But the other thing I noticed, I think I forgot the second thing. I forgot the second thing.
That's okay. It reminds me of well, you're obviously familiar with deep fakes and just like the ability of technology to not put words in people's mouths, but to completely generate videos and video and audio of people saying and doing things that they would never ever do or say. I am concerned that I think, and this is a broad concern that, and it's been echoed, it's been voiced for a while. We're entering this post-truth era, and I'm thinking about how we might ensure that that information is legit. And this is a problem that's very relevant to you, because like it doesn't matter what you've got stored in your second brain. If it's wrong, then it's next to useless. It could be worse than useless, because it could be harmful.
Yeah, there's something interesting here, which is for me, the accuracy of information is it's not something I really think about. That may seem weird, but this is something I've noticed recently, which is people see information management, which you could call this general field, as either an art or a science, right? Like I have a friend, Connor, who he has a note-taking app that he's building, and his first users are scientists. And he's all about the knowledge graph, and every source has to be cited. Everything has to be tracked down. And I'm just like, oh, that sounds terrible. To me, information is really an art. And that probably comes from my dad and my background, right? It's like I'm getting information. To me, if it's wrong, if it's bizarre, if it's weird, if it's provocative, if it's offensive, all the better. It's better fodder. It's more interesting. It's more dynamic. And in a way, I feel like with building a second brain, I'm sort of giving people this ability. It's like when you gather all these sources, all this creative material, you can put it together kind of like Legos and create not just new ideas, but almost new realities. I kind of feel like I'm an arms dealer for smart people.
That's awesome.
And it would be interesting to talk about the ethics of that. But I kind of think that this is a very Silicon Valley kind of perspective, that on balance, people are good. On balance, people do the right thing. And if these tools to shape reality are going to be out there, and they're clearly out there, I want as many people to have access to them as possible. Yeah.
Well, I think what it will also do is, when these tools are in people's hands, we have to react. Like, something bad, someone will do something nefarious, and people will be like, oh my God, that's not good. And then we'll legislate, or we'll do something, or we'll bring out a new technology to try and fix it. But I think this is something that I really want to exist. Because when I'm scrolling through Twitter, Facebook, my platform of choice, I want to know what the veracity of the link of what the information contained in whatever it is. How truthful is this thing? And what I'd love to be able to do, I wish there was like this Chrome extension or something that gave me a little tick of approval next to a New York Times article, and basically that tick would say, a list of people have verified that this is that the information contained in this article is X% accurate. And then you could click on that tick and then see who made that determination. And you might get, if it's a essay on genetics, and some dude from Harvard who's a geneticist says, yep, this is legitimate, I'm far more likely to believe that. And I think we could build this crowdsourced truth, like this. I don't know what you'd call it, but like a way of just verifying the truth of these things. And you could also see why it'd be like, yeah, it's basically commentary. You could see why people agree with it, why people disagree with it, and you could build your own understanding of it rather than just taking what you're reading as gospel. I think what this is a bias that we have. If it's on the internet, it's more legit. I think that's just something we accept because it's on the internet. It's like it's being fed to us. It's like in a newspaper. And, that's just not the case because anyone can create content. I mean,
but there's an interesting implication of the system you just described, which is, in a way, it is strengthening the idea that all truth is just an opinion because it's making each fact a matter of voting.
Yeah.
Right. It's like, what if you click that tick and it has 25 credible institutions that say it's true and another 25 that say it's false? Or, what if all the institutions say it's true and it's actually not true? Like there's a weird way in which verification of truth can actually undermine the objectivity of truth.
Yeah. Well, the thing is, we can never actually have there's like truth in the sense of things that are just definitionally true, like, a bachelor is single. But when it comes to what I guess you could say are facts of nature or something, I feel like we never, ever, ever actually get complete knowledge of or truth, but we approach it. It's like an asymptote, and we're at this, and this is what science is about, right? We don't accept anything. We constantly question everything and we test these things, and it's fundamentally, like, I guess one of the fundamental values is humility, that like, no matter how strong our belief is, we should always be open to revising it. And I think if we take that, like we are beginning to take I think as a global society, bring that back into how we think about things. I'm in Sydney now, and at the University of Sydney, all over the campus, they've got, we are unlearning X to do X. It's like, we're trying to deprogram ourselves and update our information based on the new stuff because, basically what we were learning before is wrong.
What are they trying to unlearn? What's an example?
I saw one of them was like, and this was, I actually really laughed at this because it was like, we're unlearning nutrition science to help people live longer. And they had like underneath it was like the picture was a loaf of bread with candles in it, like a birthday bread cake. It actually sounds pretty good. I love bread. But they said that, I could be wrong, but I remember something like a low protein, high carbohydrate diet. I need to double check this, but I remember it being like higher in carbs and low protein has been shown in some instances to increase it, to be good in some sense. And I'm just thinking like diet and exercise, like nutrition is one of these things where we are just learning, we have no idea what's going on. Like there are all these people talking about carnivore diets and how they're, fucking like killing it. Jordan Peterson's going around, he's like the prototypical example and his daughter, but all these people talking about carnivore diets, and then there's keto, and then there's, juice fasts, and like no one knows. No one actually knows. And then there's the fact that we're all genetically different. So what does work for one person might not work for another. So yeah, it's, when it comes to truth, I think the good thing is I think a lot of people are becoming a lot more humble and becoming better at saying, I don't know. I think. Yeah. So what do you think about so we came across each other, or I came across your work on Twitter. And I only joined Twitter. I joined it a couple of years ago, but I only kind of jumped on properly at the start of this year because I was like, I used Instagram, and Instagram's just not that great for this. Like if I'm going to procrastinate and I'm going to use social media, I want to try and make it as productive as possible. Like not productive in the, like I constantly want to get stuff done, but if I'm going to be silly, I can be silly in better ways, let's say. And I think Twitter is an amazing place. So I didn't realize that about what I mean, it depends on which Twitter you're on, but talk to me about what are your thoughts on Twitter as a platform? And I know that you're very active on there. And like I said, this is how we came across each other. What do you see Twitter as? And what are your general feelings towards it, positive and negative?
Twitter is the most amazing rapid prototyping tool ever invented.
Well, that's a quote. We'll chuck that on the Instagram or on the Twitter.
Yeah, it is the it is a, it's the only social network really that's designed for high bandwidth. Where if you look at, the guidelines for Facebook, Instagram, really any other platform, they say, oh, limit how many times you post. If you post more than this, you'll be penalized. With Instagram, you really post like once a day. It's annoying if you post a ton of photos. Twitter, as far as I can tell, there's not only no penalty for constant all day posting, there is a huge benefit. And that's what I do. Just like people ask me sometimes, what is your process for deciding what to tweet, or what is your Twitter strategy? And I'm like, what? I tweet everything and anything that comes to mind. Right.
So, does that fly against? So, and this is something that I've like observed, and it's weird because I see it as incredibly productive in a way, but at the same time, it's social media and it's addictive, and there's this weird call to open up Twitter and like you can respond so quickly, and you forget the apostrophe in something and you look like an idiot, whatever. So I find I've got this weird dissonance about it, that it's like so incredibly productive in some ways because I learned so much and I engage with really interesting people, and people follow my stuff or whatever. And like, it's good for whatever I'm doing, but it's also there's this narrative that social media is bad. And the more you use it, the worse it is for you. So yeah, what are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, it completely depends. There's this, I forget what it's called. Is it the observer effect? It has a name, but on any user-generated content platform, which includes all social media, there is some sort of distribution that 1% of people, more or less, produce 90% plus of the content, right? And most people are lurkers. Like the vast, vast majority of people are just lurking. And you're like, basically what a social media network means to you depends completely on whether you're part of that 1% or whether you're part of the 99%. If you're a consumer, then yeah, social media is a huge distraction. It's a waste of time. It fractures your attention. It just gets you upset at stupid political quarrels. If you're a creator, it is just a friggin' miracle. You have an instant worldwide free distribution network for anything that you can think of.
Do you try and make a point to post? Sorry.
What's that?
Do you think I should be posting more, or how do you think about creating this sort of like posting on Twitter? Like, is it marketing? Is it like, how do you frame it in your mind? Or is it this weird amalgamation of just things that's got a net positive effect?
Yeah, it's definitely a weird amalgamation. When I first started using Twitter, it was like mid 2012 or so, or late 2012. I was just using it for promotion. I was working at an event space, at a co-working space, and I just we had a checklist: post on Twitter, post on LinkedIn, post on Facebook. It was really dumb. And then I just noticed that every time I would log in, very quickly, I had maybe a couple hundred followers, I would start getting notifications. Right. And the notifications on Twitter are interesting because on Facebook, it's kind of bullshit, right? It's like, oh, you haven't contacted this person in 30 days. It's like completely meaningless notifications just designed to hook you back into the thing. Right. But on Twitter, it's strangers. It's, someone you've never met that has just interacted with something you posted. It's a very different experience. And then I started using it more for testing ideas. It's super interesting. Like with just a few hundred followers, the differential between the engagement is really quite remarkable. I would, even back in the day, I would tweet something and think, okay, this is a great idea. Crickets, nothing, no response. And then something else that I just thought was some lame thing, and there was quite a bit of engagement. Right? Like that. And that's when I started training my internal algorithm. Twitter has their algorithm, but I have my internal algorithm. Each of us has an internal algorithm for basically what is interesting, what is useful, what people are interested in. And over 6 years of doing that, like that algorithm has gotten so refined It's like so refined where I can, and this helps in everything. It helps in producing content, in producing products and services, in marketing. When you know instinctively and intuitively what people want and what they like, it's a superpower.
Well, it's awesome because what you're doing, you're calibrating yourself to your audience, and your audience has selected to be, it's like this positive loop in a way that you post stuff that attracts certain people of a certain type, and based on their responses, you alter how you formulate a tweet or whatever, and that can further dictate who else comes to your profile and to
Exactly.
to feed off the knowledge that you're spitting out.
I tweeted recently, I was like, I was kind of cheeky. I was like, when you follow me on Twitter, you are giving me permission to brainwash you. You're agreeing to be brainwashed by me. And then I was like, hey. And then someone responded and they were like, yes, but we're also training you. We're training you based on our engagement and our responses and what we like. I was like, oh shit, you're right.
So you tweet about things that are, related to productivity, but there's also, things of a philosophical nature there, which is one of the reasons why I wanted to reach out, because, like there's a lot of bullshit productivity stuff out there. There's, it's a really, really busy, I would say low value, generally low value space, but there's some gold there, which I would say that you're a part of the gold. And you posted recently about a life philosophy, servant hedonism. So could you talk a little bit about what servant hedonism is to you?
Sure. Yeah. This is just a few days old. It's very timely. Really, it's my life philosophy. Even though I didn't think I had a life philosophy. And the reason I didn't think I had one was the way that I do things is very bottom up. I don't like long-term strategic plans. I don't like, figuring out your bucket list for life, your life goals, and then working back from there. I don't like, identifying my 5 top values and then kind of working out everything else from there. I don't like starting at these big grand visions. And there's probably a number of reasons for that. I really like working bottom up. I like working at the really ground tactical level, creating value, doing experiments, making discoveries, and then see what emerges. See what is the gold that rises to the top, and then creating a structure just the same as if you were doing it top down, but in a much more organic way. And so I'd been suspicious for a long time of any kind of life philosophy. I'm like, a life is too complex for a philosophy. It shouldn't be planned that way. But basically, servant hedonism is a philosophy that says a great way to decide what direction to take in life and in any given situation is by serving others. That's the servant part, right? Just look around you. What needs are there? What challenges and obstacles do the people around you have that you could make a difference in? And it's a great heuristic because it's very generous and humanistic to offer to be of service. And second, it's very easy because there's needs all around you. Everyone has so many needs all the time. But then the second part of that, the hedonism, I think is even more important because in my own life, I was in the Peace Corps where I was basically a volunteer for 2 years in Ukraine, just trying to be of service for 2 years. Before that, I worked in microfinance, trying to be of service and give microloans to people in Colombia. Before that, I taught English in favelas in Brazil, trying to be of service. And I'm so aware of this pitfall of being a martyr. Right? Like I've fallen into this so many times where you start getting really self-righteous, thinking, well, why won't these people listen to me? Why won't they just do what I tell them? Can't they see that I'm just trying to be good and help them? Why won't they take my help? The helping mentality, And so the hedonism actually addresses that because it acknowledges what I think is the reality, which is it's really about me. I serve because it makes me feel good. I serve because it makes me into a better person. I serve because it gives me skills and knowledge. And I'm totally not apologetic about that. Basically, you could summarize servant hedonism with one phrase, which is serving yourself by serving others.
It's great that we're kind of programmed in a way. We've evolved to derive tremendous amounts of pleasure from serving the community and making other people happy. It's like, it's this wonderful, I guess, gifts of evolution that like we can really be like happy on a deep, deep level by helping others. And, you could think of it as selfish, it's like, oh, I'm just trying to make myself feel good. Like the reason why I go and, do whatever I do to make people to help others, like that's just selfish because I'm just trying to feel good. But I don't think that's not the best way of framing it, because like it's something that we've just evolved to do, and it's a beautiful thing. You mentioned in the piece, I just want to. So I'll link to this on the show notes. But it's something that I thought was very, very powerful, and it's this notion that let me just find it. Basically, that we are not responsible for a lot of what we are not entirely responsible for who we are, what we do, and the benefits that we derive from those actions. Like I am the result of, I'm genetically, my parents contributed to who I am, but there's a line of countless generations before who have led to me being who I am. All the words that we use for this conversation have been generated by others. All these ideas that we use to communicate have been generated by this long, long line of human beings and others. Like, there are these notions that we use to communicate up here. There's these like mental ideas, but there's also these physical things that are like built into us. So to think that we are responsible for what we do and is just kind of absurd. And it's like, I like this idea because we have and this actually relates to taxes, funnily enough, but we have in a way, a responsibility to, because we've been gifted all these things by our ancestors, for lack of a better term, and the communities in which we live, that we have in a way, a duty to give back. And if we give back, we are rewarded for doing so. In a way that's, in the way society is set up, we are rewarded in a way that is proportional to the amount of benefit we've received, that we've given. And that's where money comes in, right? So that's kind of what I see money as. Like money is like, look, all right, guys, and this is where I say, guys, I mean, society, there's a lot of stuff that we need to get done, all right? And there's this stuff called money, right? And money can make you very happy, or it can unlock happiness in a way. It doesn't make you happy, but it can help ensure that you'll be a happier person and give you greater control over what's going on. So if you go and do stuff that's good for society, we'll give you a little bit of money, but it's not all your money, right? It's not all yours because, this is ours, it's society's, and we're going to tax some of that money. We're going to take some of that back because you don't own all of it. You don't own all of it. We've given this to you. The fact that this has value is because we all think it's valuable. So you can earn as much as you want, but we will tax some of it because you are not deserving of everything. Like we are not deserving of all of the fruits of our labor, because how much of what I do or what we do is because of what I have done. And this notion of the self is, what the hell am I? So I thought it was like, when I saw servant hedonism, when I started looking at it, I was like, oh yeah, I like this. But then when I started reading, like, no, this is a lot deeper than it actually sounds. It's deeper in this grand historical sense, because we are not we are fundamentally not responsible for who we are and what we do, and we are like inextricably tied together. So I just thought it was I thought it's quite beautiful.
Thank you. Yeah, it's interesting. It's the thing about responsibility, it's interesting because often we take responsibility for things that are not our responsibility to avoid the responsibility that actually is ours. Right? Like I saw this, I worked most of my career before starting this company was in nonprofits, and I would see this constantly. There's a person working in, say, microfinance in Colombia, and they are, say, the director of the loan program, and they're taking responsibility for all of these micro entrepreneurs in this huge region of Northern Colombia, and working herself to the bone, working late at night on the weekends, not exercising, not resting, not centering herself, not grounding herself. To me, that is actually an abdication of responsibility, because her health and happiness and peace of mind actually is central to her responsibility. And by serving herself, being selfish, so to speak, and actually filling those deep reserves within herself, she would actually be far more capable of serving those communities outside of herself.
It's not just serving the communities. It's not just that she'd be better equipped to serve others, but it's also it's a matter of respect for the investment that's been put into her and into us. Like society has invested all these resources into you, and I'm not saying schooling and money, but it's like we are connected to this huge chain across generations that have led to this moment. And by not taking care of yourself, you're you're disrespecting that. So it's beautiful because it's positive on all fronts. You're all better. You're accepting, you're being grateful for what has come before you and what has led to who you are today, and you're paying it forward.
Yeah. You can't treat others better than you treat yourself. The way you treat yourself is the way you talk to yourself. The way you treat yourself is the ceiling on how you can treat anyone else. So if that internal monologue in your head is negative, it's telling you how bad you are, how wrong you are, how much you messed it up, how weak you are, how lazy you are, you better believe that is coming, whether you think it is or not. That inner dialogue is coming out in your outer dialogue. It's coming out to your partner, to your kids, to your coworkers. There's no way to avoid it. Humans are one, going back to our previous conversation, humans are fundamentally one being. We're fundamentally integrated. There's not these compartmentalized modules that interact with the world in completely different ways. The way you do one thing is the way you do everything.
Yeah.
This is why I'm just so into personal growth. And actually what I'm really getting into now, which we can get into if you want, is trauma. Healing trauma is at the very root of all of this stuff.
Yeah. Let's go there. Talk to me about it. What have you found?
Well, I did a course a few weeks ago, about a month ago, called Groundbreakers. And it was a week long, 6.5, 7 days in a completely isolated location in the Northern Sierras in California, with 3 facilitators and only 10 participants. So like a 3-to-1 ratio. And it was one of the most intense experiences I've ever had. It was basically, so you can think of like the human mind, like the very logical brain, the mammalian mind, kind of the emotional brain, and then the lizard mind, which is like the body, right? Lizard, mammal, human. And different modalities touch different ones of those, right? Talk therapy, things that are very cognitive tend to hit like the logical part of the brain. It's very conceptual. It's very driven by insights. And I've done a lot of that work before. And we did that as well. But we also we accompanied that. Essentially, the course is about treating and dealing with all 3 of those levels at once, right? So 1 minute I was with a facilitator, with a coach, and he's like doing this thing called deconstruction, where they basically get one of your mental models and kind of break it apart. They just question it from all these different sides, and they poke holes in it, and they're highly trained. And so after 5 minutes, you're just like, I have no idea what I think about this. My mental model's obliterated. But then at that moment, you go into, there was like an anger room. And this was actually my big breakthrough, is doing anger work, which in my experience is it's still like the deep, dark shadow of personal growth. Even people that do a lot of personal growth stuff, like anger is still taboo. You're not supposed to be angry. You're supposed to be a peaceful Buddha who just has total equanimity and total peacefulness, right? But we go into this room and we just start wailing on these cushions with tennis rackets. And it's kind of like primal scream. Like I had to wear gloves because I was hitting this thing so hard that it was like taking the skin off my hand. I'm just like hitting this thing as hard as I can and just screaming like I've never screamed in my entire life. and just letting out all this anger. Like, when they first told us the exercise, I was like, I don't have any anger. I feel completely at peace. They're like, just wait. Right. And we did these breathing exercises. There were certain prompts. And before I know it, I'm over there wailing on this thing. And this incredible white hot anger is coming up out of me. And I'm just like a banshee for like half an hour wailing on this thing. And what I learned through that is, so basically the whole point here of this whole course was to heal trauma. And there's essentially 3 ways you can do that. There's the talk therapy route. There's chemicals like psychedelics, like medication. But the third one is the least understood and the least explored, which is going through physical actions where you essentially act out what you were not able to act out at the time that you were traumatized. You take yourself back there and you recreate the experience, but this time you fight and you yell and you push back instead of being a victim.
And do they try were they trying to bring about those experiences, those memories that you were trying to remember what those triggers were, so you're trying to put yourself in that moment and then react the way you might have been, like the primal way you might have wanted to.
Yeah. The goal, you can think about things that make you angry and express them. Of course, you're supposed to, but the coaching is to not get lost in the story, right? To not get lost in, oh, this is actually true, or this is actually what happened. And the coaching is essential. I mean, the facilitators were just like the container of just unconditional love and support is the only thing that allows this kind of work to be possible. You can't just, do that in any environment. But the reason this was so interesting is I'm reading the book on which this course is based is called The Body Keeps the Score, which is this absolutely mind-blowing book that I just finished by this guy, Bessel van der Kolk, who has spent a few decades treating trauma. And you know what? Our symptoms of trauma are all the things that I deal with in productivity. All the symptoms that people tell me I'm dealing with X, Y, Z, I'm going to write a blog post on this and make a list of probably 20 different things are direct common symptoms of trauma.
Wow. I wouldn't have thought that. I wouldn't have thought about that connection.
And sometimes on both sides. So for example, 2 very common symptoms of trauma are either the inability to pay attention, right? All of the symptoms associated with ADHD. And what's his name on the Tim Ferriss podcast talked about this.
Monte? Yes,
he talked about the connection between trauma and ADHD.
Yeah, so he's got this book called Scattered Minds, because he's got ADHD. I've got diagnosed recently, and it was I've been thinking about it for a long time, and I went for I have a good friend of mine who has ADHD, and he recommended the book to me. And I went for a run, put the audiobook in just to listen to it. And then 20 minutes in, I was bawling. Like I was just like, I would have looked ridiculous. Like, who's this guy? Because I'm running in a public space. Like, who's this guy just like sobbing or running along the river, running by the river? And so he talks about how, I mean, a lot of it, like ADHD, we think has a lot of genetic bases, but it's not always expressed. So environment is it could be a big part of it. And what could bring it out is trauma. But anyway, I'll let you continue, but great book for anyone who's interested in ADHD, but he's great. He's
totally. But the fascinating thing, so that kind of makes sense, but hyperfocus, the ability to completely zero in, completely lose awareness of your surroundings and focus for hours and hours and hours at a time is equally a symptom of trauma. Because both sides are forms of dissociation. And dissociation is the very, very essence of trauma. When you are traumatized as a kid, you just want to escape. Your mind steps away from your body and just leaves the situation. As a child, you can't actually leave. The person abusing you is unfortunately often the person you depend on for your survival. So you have to just mentally leave. So dissociation is what they both share in common. And I'm starting to see from reading this book and doing this training, getting to the roots of trauma is going to become central to my work. I can just see it. Because I'm always just so determined to find the root. I don't want to deal with superficial band-aids. I don't want to deal with tips and tricks. I want to get to the very root. And a big part of this course that I did was, I had trouble when they said you have trauma. I was like, no, I don't. Like I had an idyllic Southern California lifestyle. Both my parents are wonderful people, never did anything bad to me, never abused me. There's no incidents, never been in a natural disaster, never been in a car accident, nothing. But what I understood is there's acute trauma. There's something happened to you, and that's different, definitely. But then there is some other thing that doesn't really have a name, background trauma, latent trauma. It's just the trauma of living. It's just the day-to-day disappointments, frustrations, anger, sadness, all the emotions you're just not able to express because of our social conditioning. That also accumulates or collects somehow. And that's, I think, something that is kind of part of the universal human condition.
Yeah. Well, it sounds, I've heard the book recommended a number of times, but I've never checked it out. But I'm really keen to go look into it. So I'll share that in the show notes. I know we're getting close to the end of our time. I just thought I'd run through some quick questions just to wrap up.
Yeah.
So what was the last thing you changed your mind on? I mean, maybe there was this trauma stuff. Like what was the last topic you changed your mind about?
Yeah, that was probably it. At least I would need to think about it a bit, but I think that was it. The idea that maybe trauma is not what I think it is. And maybe it's not, maybe there's more kinds than one. Maybe it's a spectrum. And maybe there is something for me in it. And for a lot of other people who don't identify necessarily as victims of trauma. And yet there is something in these modalities that I've been experimenting with that I think can help everyone.
Yeah. I'm just realizing that a lot of these wrap-up questions I have could probably be answered by this trauma question. So like, what topic do you think is not getting enough attention at the moment? What are you most excited about at the moment? I think it's could be wrapped up into that. What about any favorite books or podcasts, blogs, sources of media that have had a tremendous impact on your life in any way?
Oh my gosh, so many. Let's see. Podcasts, I don't venture too far. I pretty much listen to different NPR podcasts, Tim Ferriss. And then if someone recommends a specific, episode, I'll listen to it. In terms of blog, it's funny. I'm not the kind that goes to one source so much. I kind of let the tide wash over me from social media. And then I'm very agnostic about,
exactly. Just grab it as it comes by. Yep. And then try and store it somewhere, right? That's what you do. You just let the tide come over and grab the good bits and then put it in somewhere in your digital brain for later when you need it.
I'm the guy like standing in the middle of the river with those like boots that go up to your waist. And I'm just like chilling there. And then when I see this like big fish come by, I just like reach in and grab it or spear it. And then that's my information consumption. So I tend to jump all around. That's not a very satisfying answer, but in books, I'm so immersed in The Body Keeps the Score right now that it's hard to think of anything else. But I mean, my other big inspiration besides nonfiction is sci-fi. Sci-fi to me is one of the greatest wellsprings of new ideas and new perspectives that we have. And that it's seriously underrated as a source of actual practical things. Before you create something, you have to imagine it. Until the mind can see something, it can't make it, which is this really weird paradox, right? How can you make it if you can't see it? And how can you see it if you haven't made it? But sci-fi allows you to do that. It paints these future scenarios so vividly that you can imagine what VR is going to be like, what AR, what drones, what, extended minds are actually going to look like. And then you kind of have the courage to make it.
Any particular books, sci-fi books or authors?
I mean, in terms of authors, my favorite is Hyperion. I've read over 100 sci-fi books, and that's so far my favorite one. It's written like the Bible. It's like as epic as the Bible. Like, in fact, when I read it, I was raised as an evangelical Christian. The feelings that I had reading it of just epicness were, I hadn't had those feelings since, being in church as a kid.
Yeah. Have you?
I forget who the author is though, but you can, Dan Simmons.
Yeah. This might be the bad thing to bring up now, given that we're coming to the end of the conversation, but are you familiar with Jordan Peterson's analysis of the Bible and some of the exploration he's done where that's concerned?
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah. Does that speak to a lot of because in terms of epicness, like what I think is quite interesting is I've never really I grew up Catholic, but I was never, ever, ever Catholic. I just went through the motions. I was like, I'm probably an atheist and all that. But I really like what I think he's doing is taking these old texts, these old myths, and saying, well, they're not all like bullshit. They're actually taking some really, really deep, maybe not truths, but ways of observations of how we should act in the world and how that maps onto the greater reality. And what I think is absolutely fascinating is that he talks about how these stories encourage us and help us understand that we live in a place we live in a sea of chaos, right? And we go about our lives trying to confront the chaos and learn from it and create habitable order where we are. And that's based on information, right? It's what we're doing with this second brain stuff. We're confronting the world around us and trying to learn how we can exist within this crazy world in a safer way and create and contribute to the increasing of order in the world. And what I think is awesome is that this maps onto directly the increasing complexity and order we see in the universe and on Earth. Like if we think in terms of complexity, the planet Earth is this blip in its vast expanse of the cosmos of just a huge concentration of complexity and order. And it seems to me that what he's highlighting, and people get mad at him because he's not this messiah. He's just like, hey, there's all this old, really cool shit that we've learned as a species across time, and here's how this makes sense given our new understanding of science. And what he's saying is these texts are explaining or representing something that's very, very important, that it's this increasing of order that our moral intuition seem to be mapped onto in a way that what we're trying to do is increase order, because what order is, it kind of ensures that life exists now and will exist continuing into the future, and things will be better. Like the more we know about the world and the way it operates, the better we can operate within it. And that means we're less likely to just die, and we're more likely to flourish. So it's this constant, and it doesn't have an end, but it seems to be the general goal is onwards and upwards in terms of complexity and order. And I came across this, that's another conversation that we'll go, but basically just this notion, but in a more very physics, astrophysics, in a very physical context. So what's this, how does this actually operate? Well, what does this look like at the level of energy and information? So that very fundamentally, because we can measure this stuff. That's what's so cool. It's literally these notions, these religious notions are now being mapped onto physical phenomena. So that I think we're seeing this coming together of religion and science in a way that just has never happened before. And it's because we have the tools of science. And this guy, Eric Chaisson, Chaisson, he's an astrophysicist at Harvard. And I was watching this lecture of his, and the way he talks about what this cosmic evolution is, what I think a lot of people who are scientists, it's this spirit, it's this spirituality that I think scientists have, that we are a part of this wonderful, incredibly mysterious cosmos, and we are embedded within it. And all we want to know is understand our place in it. And by exploring the universe through science, we can derive a far deeper understanding and appreciation and sense of wonder than we can from not a deeper sense of appreciation than we can from other like religious texts, but they come together and they augment each other. And I'll send you, if you're interested, I'll send you this. I'll send you the link to the video. I'll post in the show notes, because it's like I was just transfixed. I was a little bit stoned, but that's, you know.
Oh, that's what I was going to say about the video. Is the best state of mind, like if you're doing video editing, which is a lot of, especially the early passes, you're just watching a lot of footage. Being stoned is an awesome state. It's probably the best state of mind for that kind of activity.
Yeah, because you're trying to time cuts, and with the music, you're trying to time like the frame cuts and the music, and you feel it, right? It's something that you actually feel rather than think about. And when you're stoned, it seems like you're far more in touch with what's going on in your body. And I've done some video editing stoned as well, and it's a performance enhancer. Like the most productive time I spend, I shit you not, is when I take a heavy dose of edibles and go for a long, long run, like 2 hours. And I'll do a month's worth of thinking. Then I'll have lots of insights. Basically, I can base like the next 1 or 2 months of work off one of those runs. Really excited for us to explore as a, like globally, just the power of these, I guess, herbal technologies. So, like psychedelics and cannabis and all that, because they hold tremendous power.
I think so too.
Yeah.
Huge.
So I guess one last question before we wrap up. What principles do you try and live your life by? Or what principles have you kind of learned in your state of, becoming over the past few years, decades? What kind of, I don't know how old you are, sorry. But what have you kind of extracted and you think is quite true about how we should go about living our lives?
Well, servant hedonism answers a lot of that.
That's very true. That's very true.
I don't know if I have many kind of overarching principles. I really value adaptability and change. And just this idea that the only security comes from adapting the change. That there's no rock to stand on. There's no fixed frame of reference. And so the only thing to do is just surf those waves of change. I think I've gotten a lot of that from living abroad, where you just have to be inherently so adaptable to live, especially in developing countries, where you just never know what's going to happen the next week or the next day or the next hour. And I think a lot of what's happening, speaking of what's happening in the world, actually, one of my biggest sources of inspiration is Brazilian culture, because my mom is Brazilian. My name, Tiago, is a very common Brazilian name. And Brazilian culture is all about this dynamic adaptation to change, because everything is changing all the time and completely unpredictable. And I think actually the so-called developed world has a lot to learn from that, because now, for the first time, our world is becoming as uncertain and ambiguous as the developing world has always been. So it's kind of like they're the experts.
I think the term developed world is such a what a misnomer. It's so arrogant as well. The arrogance is like, oh, we are developed. Oh, yes, quite. We're quite remarkable over here. Anyway, Tiago, thank you very much for your time. Is there anything you'd like to, any asks of the audience, or any parting message you'd like to leave?
Yeah, just to check out my website if they have any interest in any of this. It's Forte Labs, FORTELABS .co, not .com, .co. And that's kind of like a directory or a portal to my online courses, to my ebooks, to my blog, to my workshops and speaking. That's kind of the whole shebang. And to just reach out to me by Twitter, preferably, and let me know if they liked the episode and what they liked about it.
Yep, cool. Well, all of the links, your Twitter handle, website, and all that will be can be found I'll put them in the show notes. And Tiago, it's been an absolute pleasure. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Sam.